Hi, welcome back to this channel. I'm Stefanie Lugo.
And I'm Bryce.
And we are realtors here with My Home Group Real Estate in sunny Phoenix, Arizona. If you're into that kind of thing, be sure to hit subscribe to this channel where we are sharing all the information regarding the housing market here in Phoenix and surrounding. It is time for yet another market update. We are recording now in September of 2021, and I am excited to see what your thoughts are on what we're seeing in the market. We are armed and dangerous with data hot off the presses for what we're seeing in the real estate market. So how are you feeling with where things are at as we're going into what typically is the slower season here in Metro Phoenix?
Yeah, I mean, as the summers come, things slow down. It's hot. People are traveling. They don't necessarily want to be outside looking at homes, driving around all over the valley. But and that's kind of what I've seen. Things have slowed a little bit.
Yeah, typical seasonality, I guess. Late Q3 into Q4, that's when things tend to just kind of like pause.
Yep. And we've seen a slowdown on a lot of homes in the popular price point that we've been seeing so much rush on. But there's still a lot of movement in the market.
Yeah, I was thinking about this from last year because last year was kind of like the wrench in things where the opposite happened last year. The big slowdown was in the second quarter right after the pandemic hit, right? There was the little bit of a stock market crash and then somewhat of a swiftish recovery over last year, but what we really saw was a huge slowdown in market activity in the second quarter, and then things just started climbing all the way through the end of the year, and that's what we saw through like April. And then since April, this is what the numbers are saying, things are starting to very slowly start to even out a little bit. I don't know if even out is even the right word.
No, I don't think they've evened out, but inventory
cooling.
has increased since the beginning of the year by a decent amount, but there's still a ton of buyers out there looking, and good homes are selling fast. But it is definitely not the same as a typical summer that we've seen. Last summer was obviously, like you said, an exception because it was such a slowdown at Q2, but this summer it's still not. It's showing signs of a similar thing to what you expect in a summer, but it's just not as slow.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of things that we're seeing is still very low inventory. I think I saw a stat from an article that mentioned even year over year, we're still down yet another 2% in inventory from August to August of 2020. And even August of 2020 last year was record low inventory. So the fact that we're still as yet a little bit below that just really goes to show why we're feeling so much pressure, particularly from the buyer standpoint.
Yeah, I'm seeing very similar numbers. Actually, I think that things are down a little bit more so than last year from what I'm seeing, but they're still up from the beginning of this year.
Yeah, which is good. Now, the really interesting thing that I saw was that we definitely saw a shift beginning, like a market shift in the markets beginning in August, and the number that they were sharing was we saw a rise during July, August of almost 25% in new listings, which normally would be a huge relief because with how low we are in, it doesn't take much to see just a little bit of that pressure ease in the market. But the next thing that kind of combated that cooling measure was the iBuyer activity. Were you thinking about that too? Are you seeing that as well, just when you're out there with our buyers?
I mean, that's a whole nother layer of competition for our buyers is the iBuyer, the cash buyer that we're up against.
Yeah.
On the listing side, sometimes that can be beneficial because they're paying a lot of money for homes right now. But from the buyer's perspective, when we're representing a traditional buyer, that's another layer of competition that we're up against.
Yeah, and it's a complex topic, and you and I decided to make another video next coming up. So if you haven't subscribed to this channel, the next video that we're going to be dishing out is going to be going into depth on how the iBuyer activity is impacting the Metro Phoenix market. Phoenix is a hotbed for these companies, so I think it definitely deserves its own video where we'll go a little more into depth. But in terms of like how much inventory they are purchasing, I saw somewhere close to 9% of the total sales in the last month or two were from iBuyers specifically, which is pretty significant.
That's a big market share. And I don't even think that would probably include some of the investors that are buying it as rentals.
Yeah, that's a
which
really
are,
good point.
you know, big cash buyers swooping in, taking up another large bit of that.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing with iBuyers is their model typically is to acquire, flip, put back on the market. So hopefully that means we should see that inventory return to regular consumers over the next couple of months, but at a markup, unfortunately.
Yeah, prices that'll be higher than what they're buying it for, obviously, because they got to make their end. But
yeah,
as long as they're coming back to, you know, the consumer to be able to purchase and move into them, that's a big help.
So what are we seeing through the end of the year with these numbers? What are your predictions, so to speak, as we go through the holiday season?
I think that inventory will rise a little bit more than where we're at right now, but prices are still going up. I think people are aggressively listing their homes for higher than market value. I've seen some homes, when doing so lately, tend to drop in price. Mm-hmm. You'll see price. I just got a text a few minutes ago from an agent for a home I showed 2 days ago, just did a price reduction. So I think that sellers were aggressive recently and price too high. I think inventory is going to be going up a little bit more, providing more options for buyers. And I don't think you're going to see a dip in prices overall. I just think that you're seeing things, as they continue to rise, just rise slower than they did earlier this year, where it was bananas.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really important to make. And when we're talking with our clients, we're always making that distinction of like, don't be confused by price reductions and the slow of rising prices. That does not necessarily mean there's an overall dip in values, right? So I think that a lot of people are like waiting for the dip, they're waiting for price reductions, they're waiting for home prices to come down, is the language that we're hearing. And I think that's just totally contrary to reality.
Yeah, I think right now is a good time for a lot of buyers because, you know, you're just seeing prices steadily grow rather than the jump that they had earlier this year. And with inventory rising, it just gives them more options in this, again, still super competitive market.
So my thought going into the holiday season is, one thing, if we are finally back on this more cyclical trend driven by like the seasons, what we typically see is the slowest time for resale happening in Q3 and Q4, but primarily Q4 during the holidays, October through December. That's when things really slow down because fewer people want to list their homes and less people are spending money to buy homes because they're entertaining all the holiday stuff. And so if you're a buyer, what are you thinking from that standpoint?
You'd expect lower inventory, but
yeah,
there are still people that are building throughout the year right now. So I would expect, as a buyer, or representing a buyer rather, I would try to stay as aggressive as possible, still thinking about being able to get a deal if there are any to be had come a slower season.
Yeah, I agree. I think that even so, if we're looking at relative competition, right, what we have been seeing with our buyers is like, in some cases, upwards of 10, 20, 30 offers on a property that we're competing against, which is just the most ridiculous thing. Nobody wants to be in that situation, whether you're the buyer or the seller. It's really truthfully not fun for anybody. But as we go into the slower season, even if you find yourself in a competing scenario of like 1 to 3 other offers, that's still way better to be in. But if you really time it and you're like really kind of butting up against the holidays and you are able to stay competitive and make some really strong offers on homes, maybe you do get that situation where you get a great home, you're not having to drive up your offer price with other competing offers, and it can be kind of a good scenario. But then the trade-off is you're moving during the holidays.
Yeah, I think buying during the holiday season is actually a pretty advantageous thing for buyers. Because your competition might be traveling, might be doing their little get-togethers, or just not buying, not spending. So if you're a serious buyer, the holiday season is one of my favorite times for buyers to be able to find a property.
Yeah, we've been able to get some pretty sweet deals for our clients in the past.
You just might be able to take advantage of the situation when other people aren't out there looking, because it is a slower season.
Okay, so how about sellers? So on the other side of the coin, if you are a seller considering making a move during the holidays, a lot of our sellers try to like be really tricky with the timing, or they might just like not even try and wait until the new year. So what is your tips for somebody who's considering selling while still taking advantage of the hot sellers market?
Yeah, I wouldn't list over a holiday weekend specifically, maybe do it a couple weeks in advance if you are going to, but then be prepared for these buyers that might be trying to take advantage of the seasonal market. I would just get it out there if you're ready to do it, if you're ready to move. We need the inventory still, so
yeah,
serious buyers will be ready. And
do you think we are past the seller frenzy conditions, or the buyer frenzy conditions rather? So a lot of times we might be speaking with sellers and they're like, well, our cousin listed and they had like 20 offers in a weekend, they had their pick of buyers. Or, oh, we're seeing these other homes in the neighborhood sell in one day with multiple offers. Are we past that?
I think it depends on the price point.
Okay,
because your biggest price point under $350 or so, you still have so many buyers in that price point that want a home, and interest rates are still ridiculously low. So if you're in that price point, yeah, you're gonna likely see a big amount of competition. As you go up, there's still competitive buyers out there, a large amount of buyers, but going into the holiday season, if you're in a higher price point, you might have fewer.
Yeah,
we're already seeing fewer buyers in some scenarios, above 450, 500, where things might be a little bit slower. We're seeing that right now.
I did see that the monthly median sales price this month was 401,000 versus 325,000 last year, which is an increase of almost 24%.
Yeah.
That's crazy, and that is a big number. That's a direct result of how much demand is in that price point under 400K. So in terms of preparing for 2022, what should either buyers or sellers be doing today to make sure that they're setting themselves up for a path for a successful transaction in the next year?
Well, for buyers, we don't know where interest rates are going to be. So if you are a buyer, and with the market still rising, if you are a buyer, I'd suggest getting out there right now, trying to take advantage of the larger inventory than we had earlier this year and slower prices that are rising. I'd get out there. We don't know where rates will be. We don't know where prices are going to be.
Yeah, and I think that also goes for sellers too, because depending on the rate situation, interest rates, that has a massive impact on buyer affordability, which is going to directly impact the number of the amount of demand that sellers might have if they're waiting until the spring to list their homes.
Could slow things down on their homes and bring in lower prices then.
Yeah. Well, lots to think about as we're heading into the holiday season. I think that was really helpful, and I'm really excited about our next video where we will be sharing about the iBuyer activity and how that is impacting market conditions, the housing market conditions in the Metro Phoenix area. So if you have not subscribed to this channel yet, be sure to do so that you are notified when we're dropping that video next week.
Thanks again for tuning in with us. We'll see you next week.